From Chicago's CAN TV, this is Chicago Newsroom.
Well, hi there. Welcome to Chicago Newsroom here on CAN TV. I'm Ken Davis on a blistering hot summer day, which makes us think about the fact that it's almost 2018 right here in Illinois, because according to the Sun-Times, J.B. Pritzker and Bruce Rauner are spending between them more than $120,000 a day on their campaigns. So with that kind of investment, we're going to get a pretty darn good governor out of it, aren't you? Don't you think? So anyway, it's just another week, and we got political forest fires raging in Springfield, at the county board, the Chicago Public Schools, City Hall, all the usual stuff. So today, we need to call in the experts to help us tamp down our anticipation of how bad things are getting, because we're not even talking about the federal system here, we're talking about the local. And that means Tony Arnold is back. He's Illinois politics reporter for WBEZ. Glad to have you here when you're not chasing back and forth to Springfield. And also, Chris Fusco is here. Last time Chris was here, Chris was simply a reporter at the Chicago Sun-Times. It's been a while, but now managing editor of the Chicago Sun-Times.
Good to be back.
It's great to have you, and congratulations to you. What was it, about like September that happened or something?
September last year. Almost nearing a year.
Coming up on a year.
Almost made a year.
Yeah. I never had the nerve to call you because I figured, you can't get the managing editor to come out and do our little TV show, but I said we got Tony Arnold. You guys were this team on the DCFS story. So, anyway, thanks.
Hey, it's good to be here. Good to be back with Tony, and good to be talking about things. So.
Well, instead of sitting there being a bureaucrat and,
there you go.
And telling people what to do,
trying not to screw it up.
Yeah,
that's my mantra.
Are you enjoying yourself?
I am enjoying myself. Yeah, it's an
you wear a suit
job.
now.
Actually, I've got to go to the City Club luncheon today to support Mary Mitchell, who's going to be speaking. So I'm a little overdressed. Normally, I'm kind of like Tony walking into the newsroom, just like
Office
when we used
casual.
to drive around and do stuff. So
Well, I want to talk a little bit about the Sun-Times, but we got to really kind of get busy here. And you know what? Instead of me blabbing on about things, Tony, what's bugging you the most? What's the biggest thing that's on your mind right now? I should say that when Tony came in today, I said to Tony, "Hey, Tony, Springfield, Illinois politics reporter, may you live in interesting times." And Tony's response was,
yeah, I'm pretty sure Tony's exhausted. It's been an exhausting past month.
There is no break.
No.
There won't be a break. I mean, my approach to this job is tend to be looking at where are we going to be a month from now, or what am I going to be doing? Where will I be in the state of Illinois in a month? And for the last several months now, it's where am I going to be in the next hour? It's just the story has changed. I don't know how many times, and we're on from 2 years of covering the lack of a state budget to now the lack of a school's budget, and I've been getting to know the education reporters a lot better, who I think are getting to know the politics reporters a lot better. And so this is where we're at now. Is what's our schools going to open?
Yeah,
if they do open, how long can they last?
It would be so easy to just say, "Oh, we have a budget now. The story's over," but it ain't even close to over.
Not even if there were a school's budget, the state budget story wouldn't be over, because there's still. The issues facing state government are so compounded now and are going to be so long lasting. I think I don't see an end to me covering the financial situation of the state of Illinois in your near future, as long as I have this job.
You'll be in your 70s and still covering the fiscal mess.
Well, what's interesting to me, looking at it now from a reader perspective and an editing perspective, is that it's the credit agencies that really force the state's hand here, right? I think if it was up to Rauner and Madigan, they would have just kept battling it out, because really we're at this, looking at the future of the state and what are we going to be? Are we going to be, is Rauner, kind of wants to make us an anti-union state, or he's kind of backed off that rhetoric. Now I think we're going to kind of go back to that with the people he's brought in, versus Madigan trying to protect labor rights, but also by doing that, potentially exacerbating the pension problem. So we had these two guys, and the credit agency stepped in and said, hey, we're going to lower you to junk. The cost of borrowing is going to be out the window. And even Rauner at that point still said, I don't want to do it this way.
Right.
And you had those, I think, 20 Republicans in the House that
10 ultimately
10
who voted to override.
voted
in the
override,
House.
and
Yeah.
20 that voted, I think, the first time around or
It was,
something to prove.
16 total. to get the
16
thing
total.
passed.
All right, so
There
see,
you
this
go.
is why I'm
There's
glad
your
you brought Tony here. He can correct my math a little
Well, I
bit.
mean, that in itself is interesting because you have these people who kind of revealed themselves, but when they actually had to vote, they knew they had the cushion, so some of
Right.
them didn't have to vote because probably they're committing suicide in their district, I presume. or
And they
something.
did, there were some of the Republicans who voted to pass the budget who did not vote to override the governor's veto of the budget. And,
Yeah.
in what, 3 days, they said that they heard from enough constituents to change their mind and
Yeah.
change their vote.
Yeah.
And that meant then Democrats flipped from voting against the budget the first time, I should say maybe the tax increase the first
Yeah,
time,
yeah.
to voting for
Coming back around.
to override
yeah,
the veto.
And now we're barreling head into another showdown
Yeah.
over the school financing formula.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in between, we've got chaos, within the Rauner administration.
Well, Lauren Fitzpatrick in your paper today did a really good roundup that I think is worth a read for if you're not subscribing to the Chicago Sun-Times. We got a whole story to talk about there, but it's really interesting because the schools are going to get their budgets today. As we're sitting speaking, they're probably assembling right now all the
Westinghouse
principals
High School.
at Westinghouse, and they're just going to tell them, here's what your budget is, except that it's dependent on $300 million that we may or may not get.
Right.
And how would you like to be a principal? I mean, what would it be like to be trying to run like a fairly large high school or elementary school or something? I don't know how you do it.
Well, this has been the CPS stance now a few years running.
Right.
The money, we budget for the money's going to be there. Wait, no, the money's not there. Okay, what do we do to get the money? How do we shuffle it? What do we borrow? Oh, wait, now the borrowing rate's up to, depending on whether it's short-term, long-term, anywhere, as high as 6%. I think one CPS borrowing deal has hit 9%. I mean, just, compare that to what you think about what you're paying on your mortgage or your car loan, and it's just a real crazy time. So I think there should be some clarity, maybe sooner rather than later, right? Because they're going to have to send the bill to the governor or find a different way to pass new legislation that the governor wants.
Yeah.
But I mean, it really all boils down to the pension contribution, and that's where Rauner appears to be.
He will not budge on that.
He will not budge
Yeah,
on that. He
yeah,
does not want
yeah.
CPS to get that $220 million.
Now I'm confused here about something, and that is that there is a new plan for the distribution of money to schools in Illinois, right?
Correct.
That's part of this legislation.
That is what passed the legislature, but they put a hold on it, so it can't get sent to the governor yet because he said he would veto it, and they don't want that. So
Because a part of it is making the pension payment for Chicago, and so he
is
would veto the whole
inserted
thing
in there.
because of that.
well, Rauner has recently been saying he would veto part of the bill that would pertain to Chicago public schools.
Okay,
Right.
all right.
The old amendatory veto, the
Amendatory
AV.
The
Yeah,
mandatory veto. And
So-
he does have the power to do that, but although Chicago Public Schools says that what he's talking about would actually be unconstitutional. So it's setting itself up for
Because
a very long, prolonged court fight
Right, right.
over.
Because the
if
Supreme
this
Court's
even
already
happens.
made it clear that they're not going to stand for what is the word?
Well,
diminishment.
they've ruled that's diminished benefits in retirement. As far as
Okay.
contributions to
Oh, all right,
a pension
that's-
fund from the state government, well, they've skipped those pension payments for years, and that's been allowed so far. So
right.
the Supreme Court decision has been you can't cut retirement benefits, healthcare and retirement.
You
that kind of
can't
thing.
cut the payouts, but how it gets in there is not
And
my
that's-
problem.
And that's why we're even talking about this,
Right,
because the
right.
pensions have been skipped for so
Right,
long that
right.
they've.
So
they're
for
going
most of my
insolvent.
adult life, there's been this debate about how Chicago or Illinois schools are funded, and that it's so completely disproportionate, and poor people get screwed, and all that. Is this piece of legislation essentially the fix to this decades-long, or maybe multiple decades-long debate about how to fund schools?
I think most people say it is.
Huh.
But there's a but.
Yeah.
Even Governor Rauner, I think, is okay with most of what the formula is. His education secretary has said he's okay with 90% of it, but that 10% is too much, and that's what he would veto out. So for the most part, if the elected officials, the legislature, even though this thing passed with the bare minimum in the House, the formula itself, the proposed formula, the new distribution model to give districts in poor property wealth areas more state money than what they've been getting, because they say the whole systems have been inequitable for the last several years, that yes, this is a good way to do it. There's still some advocacy groups out there that are saying this whole thing still stinks, but it got enough of the support of the governor and the legislature to get passed. So
why did this happen now? I mean, we've always heard that all the rich school districts would fight to their deaths to make sure this doesn't happen.
Well, at one point, the legislature passed, I think a key part of this that's often forgotten is the legislature passed some laws saying, Chicago has to fully fund its teacher pension system. I mean, what we've got here is a little bit of the history lesson, of course, and Mayor Emanuel loves to tell this history lesson is that, Chicago is treated differently because Chicago has its own teacher pensions and the rest of the state has a teacher pension fund. Why are they not one big state teacher pension fund and Chicago is part of that? That probably has to do with politics going back decades, with politicians going back to the Richard J. Daley days trying to control the deals that are done to invest that pension money and picking different, by all rights, it should probably be one big state teacher pension system, but that's not going to happen, right? So then the state passes a law that says, hey, Chicago, you gotta fund the Chicago Teacher Pension Fund. And all of a sudden, after kicking the can down the road for years, we've got to make $600 million, $700 million payments into that fund to bring it up to the funding level that state law allows. Tony obviously remembers, and I think you do too, Ken, there was, for a while there, Emanuel was trying to get Rauner to say, we don't need to pay the whole thing, right? Let's keep, let's figure out a reasonable sum somewhere in the middle that we can all agree on, and
Some
then
kind
we'll
of
ramp back,
right.
to what, and the governor, slammed his fist and said, no, we're not going to do that. And
that's exactly why that new, what should the state or what should the city be paying to its pensions in 5 years, in 10 years. They want to kind of map that out for a long-term 30-year plan. And that's why Rauner says, well, there's a huge increase written into this in, I think, the year 2023. Don't hold me to that. That exact year, which means if the city has to pay that much more in 2023, guess what's going to happen? Property taxes are going to shoot right up, says Rauner. So that's why he says that this would prevent, his veto would prevent this property tax increase in the future. And as you know, property taxes is a bit of a topic, big talking point for the governor. So, and let alone the Democratic candidates for governor too.
I mean, people always ask, well, how are we going to solve the pension problem? And the only way to really solve the pension problem, unfortunately for all of us, is death. We have to, there are some benefits that are being structured a little differently now, probably not as much potentially as they need to be, to protect us financially down the road. But the bottom line is the courts have ruled that we have given folks a constitutional right to this pension, regardless of how generous it is. You can't take it away from them, and that's life. So how do we get them off? We don't, and it's theirs for the rest of their lives. And that's, I know it's a dark way of thinking about it, but it's also it's realistically what we're dealing with right now.
And I'm wondering if there's going to be a bigger push at some point to change the Constitution in some way or another.
Well, I'm seeing there are a lot of places now where people are saying we need to have another constitutional convention. And every time I hear that, I think, and I know the first thing that everybody's going to want to change is they're going to want to change that diminishment clause, probably.
Yeah, I just wonder though. I think you can litigate this till the cows come home. I mean, I just think any way you slice it, even if there was a change, there's going to be a legal argument to be, we're looking at lawyers being very busy.
Lawyer.
On this subject.
So Governor Rauner has responded to this, what could be considered to be a defeat of his agenda, by pretty much canning everybody who worked for him. This seems odd to me, but what do you guys make of this? There we go
Well,
again.
no, it's there's a lot of different ways you can look at it without, and you kind of have to get into the governor's head. And what he said publicly, it's baloney, right? Baloney that any of this has to do with a certain number of Republicans overriding his veto on the budget impasse just to fix that. It's baloney. But you're also looking at re-election, and you talked about the money story that we had earlier this week. Rauner is spending $20,000 a day toward out of his campaign fund, and he doesn't even have a primary opponent. He's got nearly $70 million at the ready, $50 million of his own, a lot of $20 million plus from Ken Griffin over the years, founder of the hedge fund firm Citadel. And he's got a lot of money.
And between them, they could replenish anything. Anytime it goes to zero, they can just throw another 20 million back in there, right?
I'm going to let you.
I don't know how much they have, but I don't know.
Oh, I'm
really
sure.
Want to.
Well, by the way, and thanks, Mr. Griffin. I know we tend to deprecate some of your efforts sometimes, but thanks for the bike path or the the bifurcated bike path. Appreciate that. It's really nice of you to do that.
So getting back to Rauner, we've got this kind of weird political time now where is he if there's Mark Brown wrote about this a few days back, and I'm going to take a little twist on that. People want to, Scott Fornick, our political editor, talks about this. What Trump has proven is that people want somebody they can believe in, somebody who is taking a principled stance, regardless kind of maybe what the principle is. They like that kind of politician. That's what the Trump era has delivered us. And Rauner, I think, may be, stealing a page from that playbook, even if some of those people go against some of the values that he espoused in his first campaign. And he's always kind of this social moderate, fiscal conservative. Well, now taking this turn, he's taken a turn a little bit more into, social conservatism too, with some of the stories that have been coming out about staffers that he recently hired have been posting on the internet.
I think this has been a story because you want to look at where his administration, the staff members of his administration came from. A lot of them came from working for Mark Kirk. In either the House when he was in the House or the Senate, and Kirk's whole political philosophy, when he was in the House, he represented Chicago's northern suburbs, which is not a strong Republican stronghold. But he represented that area for years, and then in the Senate was to be a moderate. To be a moderate Republican is how Republicans win statewide in Illinois, and it worked out for him up until 2016. So that's the line of thinking that a lot of the staff members that Rauner hired originally when he came from, and after this state budget passed, they've either been fired or resigned in favor of a few members from the Illinois Policy Institute and other kind of blogs or people without government experience necessarily working for elected officials, but more working for advocacy groups. That's how this whole thing is becoming a story. It's based on where the staff came from, as opposed to now everyone's just trying to figure out what's it mean. Where does he want to go?
Right.
That either that prior staff wouldn't go or couldn't go or just chose not to.
Right. I mean, you wonder, did he feel that he was being ill-served by that staff, that they were too liberal, they were too wishy-washy, and he needed to harden the rightness of them?
Tina Svendelis in our paper this week, it's been funny now that we've got this rearranging of deck chairs and people coming in and out. It's been coming out through various sources that some of these staffers in Rauner's administration were really, if you notice, Rauner came in, right to work was this is going to be a right to work state. We're going to be this and we're going to do this. And I think they kind of, some of those Kirky, Topeka-ish, folks kind of steered him off it and said, hey, let's try to do something that's attainable here and try to solve this. And that rhetoric got toned down, on this. At one point, I think even Rauner had said publicly he was kind of dropping the right to work agenda. And so
he said that a few times.
Yeah, he said that a few times. So it's kind of like we moved back toward the center. Well, that didn't work.
Yeah.
So now let's go back toward what we came in on as we're hurtling toward a 2018 gubernatorial election.
Right.
I should say that Rauner publicly has had kind words to say for the staff that he fired, and he said that this isn't actually any kind of shift. It's going to be the same thing.
No hard feelings, but you're fired.
Does anyone, believe that. I'll see where he goes from here. I think the first step is where we started this conversation, and that's school funding formula, and that's an immediate, impasse that's happening right now that this new staff is going to be handling.
And this is many of the members of the new staff that he's brought in have expressed themselves publicly as being opposed to teachers' unions and therefore, I would assume, pensions and that kind of thing. So they will stiffen his resolve, I'm presuming, to do this veto.
I don't know if that resolve needed to be stiffened. It was there originally. If anything, I think they probably are going to be in line with.
Can I just sort of touch briefly on the politics of the governor and his disaster appearances? It seems to me that he was pretty late getting up into Lake County and the other areas where the major flooding has been. And I wonder if maybe it's because he really he just hasn't really thought of that as being one of his priorities, to have to be the guy who stomps around in the mud and reassures people.
Normally politicians go to that stuff like moths to flames.
Yeah.
The second the water hits, they're swooping in and looking around,
filling
sandbags, and doing all those
hands
things.
dirty.
Right.
And now he's been up there, I think, a few times now since he was kind of criticized. I don't know, Ken. I think if you look at the climate of the state right now, there's a lot to do. To a certain degree, I think, and with these staff changes, there was a lot of vetting that needed to be done. Clearly, some of it didn't get vetted right, as opposed to the whole body man situation with homophobic tweets and things surfacing.
Yeah.
So
he had tell us about that. He had a guy who he hired and he interviewed him, right, personally.
He did interview him, yeah, and just his Twitter account was filled with things that we can't say on TV, and people found this. It came out, and right away they had to, let him go.
But it seems extraordinary that nobody noticed that before he was actually hired. I mean, anybody with a smartphone can access his Twitter account.
Yeah, but I think it also speaks to state procedure and all that stuff. I don't know that in the state policy manual it says Google everybody, even though that we kind of do that.
Yeah.
I know.
Come on now. I mean, that just seems you're hiring somebody for a sort of a
I think what this comes down to is this is he's creating a new administration for himself, at least in terms of his own office. That's why this is getting, when you have such high turnover, up to 20 people have either been fired or resigned in 2 weeks. That's a huge turnover, and it's policy people, it's high ups in his office, people who advise him on policy, the chief of staff for the entire state government. So it's noteworthy for that reason alone.
And his communications office was just pretty much kicked out, right? Largely.
Some were fired, some resigned. It's the same situation.
And actually, Chris, that kind of gets to the thing we were just talking about, because Barack Obama was very good at not going to disasters, but making sure that you saw the picture of him in the Situation Room, watching the live feeds and monitoring it like crazy. And a good PR office or communications office would have done that for Rauner and just said, he can't come right now because he's, as you can tell, he's got a lot to do, but he's with you all the way right down here in Springfield. He's watching everything. He's getting reports every 15 minutes. But that was the piece that seemed to be missing to me.
Yeah, well, I just think one of the knocks on the governor has been he's a great business executive, but he's had to learn the political end of it, right? Well, now he's got a lot of communications folks and other top staffers who are coming in from kind of this conservative, libertarian-leaning policy think tank that now need to insert themselves in government. So there's going to be a learning curve there. I think the governor's still learning. I actually think he's starting to understand it a little more. One thing about IPI, where a lot of these folks come from, they've done a great job being critical of Mike Madigan. I think more people have an awareness of Mike Madigan in the state now than they have in years, even though Madigan has been around for.
The Republican Party's been trying to get at that message for I don't know how long now, and it's only begun to resonate more, I think, since Rauner took over.
I know that you cover the state and not the county, and Chris, I'm sure you have to cover everything, but I did want to just talk a little bit about the the sweetened beverage
Yeah,
tax,
yeah.
which it really wasn't all that controversial until almost the
Until it
point
hit
when
the
it
court,
became
right.
and then it was in court.
Yeah, and I think the way the judges kind of put this is there are some things, I don't know, I think at the end of the day, given that these things have come into place in other jurisdictions, that there's going to be some form of it that hits. Now, is it the exact current form? I believe we're going to be in court on Friday on this, where we may get a little more clarity, but hey, government is looking to creative ways to fund itself. Right now, we finally have an income tax increase in Illinois, right? One could argue we probably should have had it the entire time, right? Given the way things are going. This is another mechanism. We got the bag tax at the city level, so we're going to get creative with
Which,
these
interestingly,
things.
is another one of these kind of taxes where you have a dual purpose. You want to raise the money, but you also want to influence behavior. And the bag tax is a great example of that, as opposed to the way it was being done before. So I guess the question is, can we believe
Tony
Preckwinkle
that it's
at
really
this
going to be
point.
Armageddon if it doesn't pass.
Because, we've seen this in the past, certainly with mayors who say, we need this tax increase, and so we're going to have to close the red line, or whatever. There won't be any more garbage pickup until. And it has a whiff of that. There are 700 or something empty positions at the hospitals, and now she's, or at least Dart says that she's telling him he's got to lay off 925 people at the jail.
Right.
I mean, come on, it just doesn't. It defies believability.
Yeah. I mean, can government, when government's handed a defeat, what does it normally do? It borrows.
Yeah.
Right. That may be where we're headed here. It could be a combination of all of the above. President Preckwinkle is putting forth the worst case scenario. Okay, we don't get it, and then we figure out a solution from there. Interestingly, I think a lot of the initiatives that are going on within the jail, with the whole bail bond issue, right, to bring it kind of full circle.
Right.
If those things are done right and go well, that should ease some of the overcrowding at the jail, which could lead to having less people there to monitor inmates, and so it's all churning right now, and it all remains to be seen, what the revenue stream is going to be from this if it exists, and then whether those reforms go as planned. I mean, you could see a horror story scenario where something doesn't go right with those reforms, and somebody who shouldn't have gotten out gets out.
Something pops up over there.
There's a horror story there, and now the pendulum swings right back, which kind of takes you to DCFS and all those things.
Right. And
talk about.
We have pretty much run out of time. I know you have to get out of here because you got to go over to the City Club. But can we just talk about that very briefly? You guys did a series in 2014, I think, about whatever the messes were at DCFS at that time. My recollection is that somebody resigned or got fired. I think there have been a couple of other changes since then. Now the latest DCFS guy has left. We've had 5 or 6 directors in the last couple of years at DCFS. Is there any hope for this organization, or does it just is it by definition a hopeless process?
Is it by
And can you do it in 20 seconds?
Yeah. I think what I would just say is, the Tribune's been reporting a lot about Sheldon, the director who now resigned, and apparently the governor asked him to stick around despite this latest scandal over the contracts, which DCFS has had issues with in the past under prior administrations.
Historically.
Under the Quint, and that's gone on and on. Chris would certainly know more about those contracts than I would, but this is it seems to me to be a redux of a story that DCFS has been told. There's a new director again that the governor's appointed, and the Senate I think still needs to confirm her. But this is you're right. This is a pattern, and it's a little different than what we looked into. We were looking at child deaths as opposed to how the
increase in child deaths.
Was contracting, but this agency's, I don't know.
It's a hard job. The lesson for any politician should be never declare victory at DCFS, because there's always going to be something
next
when
day
you're dealing with that kind of system and families. It's a very hard job, and it's a difficult job. But I think Tony hit it kind of on the head. Contracting, things like that, lawmakers have always tried to place certain contractors that they know. Clout invades DCFS, And that's where, you get some problems. And that seems to be what the Tribune is kind of going after right now. And there's clearly some smoke there. And Sheldon's gone. I mean, it's not, he got out the door. But, one thing that was interesting to me is one of our reporters did a story. And there was used to be DCFS took too many kids, right? The system was flooded with kids. Then the system kind of cut back. Well, now this year, because of the opiate epidemic, despite the Samaj Crosby case, in which everybody, kind of the public opinion seems to be they should have taken the kid but didn't, they are actually going back now and taking more kids into protective custody because of the opiate epidemic.
I see. Yeah.
So it's just it's complicated, and that's not to say that the stories aren't newsworthy and well reported, and that's the only way to bring it out into the open is to look at all things. But it's a complicated agency.
One thing we've been trying to do is push the candidates for governor to address what are you going to do for this agency? Everyone's, at least on the Democratic side, has had a little bit of a different answer on that. But I think this is going to be a campaign issue in one way or another. Is it something that people vote on? I don't know about that, but it's something that.
How would you like to be that person who gets the call from the governor or the governor's staff saying, "We've decided we'd like to ask you to be director of DCFS"? Do you just hang up the phone and run, or what? How do you handle it? Okay, we've run out of time. Chris, I know you have to get out of here, but I can't let you go without talking a little bit about the Sun-Times. First of all, I'm like most of Chicago, incredibly happy to see that this deal went down and that you have been bought by this consortium of individuals and unions and whatever. Are you happy about it?
Yeah, I think we're all happy about it. I mean, we're all happy that that we're sitting here, and I'm looking at a few Sun-Times on your table. I think the new ownership, I think they're, just kind of, again, 30,000-foot view. There have been concerns expressed about union ownership of the newspaper. There's been concerns expressed about, some of the people that are investors in the paper have been, written about by our investigative reporters. It's just like legislation. You don't know until you pass it, right? And right now, the new management, specifically CEO Eisendrath, have said all the right things. I think the newsroom's going to be left alone. Those decisions are left up to Jim Kirk and myself. And I think as long as we're following the playbook that's kind of been laid out, there's a bright future for the Sun-Times.
Well, Ed Eisendrath brought up the firewall concept, and I presume that Jim Kirk, the overall editor, and you as managing editor, you guys are the sentinels at the firewall, right?
Yeah, which is kind of what has historically been the case in every newsroom, right? You don't want outside, and Eisendrath I think said it pretty well. You don't once you start to mess with the sanctity of the news, you're killing your core product. You can't mess with the news. So I think we've shown since in the brief time that the transition has happened. I mean, the day they bought the paper, we had a story about John Coley being criminally charged on our front page. Big labor leader with they made it a point to say, we realize that's the news that day. So that to me is a sign we're headed in the right direction. Now, the other industry challenges that we're facing, in newspapers, those persist.
Everybody's facing them.
Yes.
I noticed that the last time you were on, I went back and looked at the show that you were on, and you were here just after your Springfield bureau correspondent had left because of political interference in the newsroom, and you said some pretty strong things about that in support of him. So I find it kind of refreshing that you are going to be the guy who's going to have to be fighting those fights if those fights erupt. But my major point is that under the old ownership, those things erupted. So, it's a tension, it's a pressure that happens everywhere.
And you know what? It's existed throughout history. I mean, there's this guy that owned the Tribune one time. His name was Colonel McCormick.
Yes, I heard of him.
You ever heard of that guy? This is historically how there's always a push and pull. There's always going to be calls made to publishers and CEOs about stories. There's always going to be, pressure exerted on those folks. And one thing that I think Jim and I have both kind of relayed up that chain is that be prepared because you're going to get the calls. They're going to come. We've been doing this a long time, whether you're a reporter.
But they're getting them at the Washington Post and the New York Times and CNN and everywhere else. I mean, that is part of the ticket that you punch when you're working when you're working in the business.
Exactly.
I just I just really wish you the best. I really do. I mean, I know that Answers Media is part of this thing now, and,
Right.
and you guys are going to maybe finally, hopefully, for the first time, really be able to tackle the
Yeah,
digital
you know,
side of things in a way that you haven't before.
At this point, I think we're still trying to figure, get our sea legs on us on that one, But I do think there's going to be some integration. We're going to be out in the West Loop now, as opposed to River North. It's nice to know where you're going, right?
Nice places to eat.
Nice place to see. We'll be closer to you, Ken.
That's
out
right.
Here,
You can just walk over here.
Walk
yeah.
over here.
Yeah.
Sit down more often.
Yeah, well, we're in the West Loop and we like it here. So, thank you so much, Chris, for your generosity, staying a little bit late. We'll get you out of here right now. And as always, Tony, great to see you again.
Great seeing you. Thanks.
We'll convene this panel again sometime soon, I hope.
All right, sounds
And
good.
I'm especially really grateful that you came over because I know how busy you
Happy to be here.
Incredibly busy you are.
Happy to be here.
Chris Fusco is managing editor of the Chicago Sun-Times, and Tony Arnold is political reporter for Illinois political reporter for WBEZ. And I'm Ken Davis, thanking you for watching. We'll be back again next week with another show about something equally important, I'm sure, but it hasn't erupted yet, so we'll figure it out later on. And you can watch the show by going to this address anytime. This and all the other shows are there. Thanks for watching. See you next week. Bye for now.